The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? lit, lit, lit.
Uhuru, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. For today's study, we'll initiate part 2 of our discussion on the tactics and strategy for Black liberation, first presented by Chairman Omali Yeshitela at a Black Organizers Conference in April of 1977. You can find the study materials located in the Facebook and YouTube descriptions. We'll have the chairman read through another section of this historic document and take time for some questions from our audience. Before we begin, make sure to like and share this video on the platform that you're viewing from. Let us now begin part 2 of the political aspects of building a mass movement, the tactical and strategic objectives for Black liberation, presented to us today by the leader of the African nation and worldwide African revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Director Akile. And again, I want to acknowledge the presence and participation of the number of people who are in this study from around the world. I want to give a special acknowledgement to the brothers and sisters, the comrades on the continent of Africa, who are participating sometime in group sessions and who are having to deal with the underdeveloped or misused infrastructure that's in Africa that's been constantly bled and therefore limiting our ability for electricity and internet connections and things like that. I know you're going through some struggles with that. I appreciate the fact that you go through all of that and still work very hard to participate in these studies. Also, I wanted to acknowledge the people who here in St. Louis who do come out to these studies so that we can be together when we have these discussions. That's extremely important. One of the missing factors in the development of our movement over the last period, and not only because of COVID, but specifically because of COVID and other factors like internet and social media, is that we have too little interaction with each other, and our relationship is too often with computer screens. And you can't do anything with a computer screen. In fact, it can be extraordinarily deceptive. There is this thing that's called cyberspace that is extremely unreal in the sense that it does not really speak to relationships that we have in the real world. I know people with hundreds and hundreds of friends on social media, but don't know their next door neighbor. And you can't organize without knowing your next door neighbor or somebody who lives in the community where you live and things like that. We have to be able to take on this work. And And so therefore, I just wanted to express appreciation to those people who are able to come to this kind of session, these meetings, people who are holding group meetings, not just in Africa, but wherever you are to participate in these studies so that there can be engagement, human contact. So having said that, what I'd like to do is to get into the study. But first, I wanted to read the preface. We will begin on page 8 in the actual study. But I want to look at the preface because the preface just says something about how this study, how this presentation that's in this document was organized and why it was organized and what have you. And I also want us to remember that this is a document that was written by the leader of a political party, and that this party had assumed for itself the responsibility of the African working class taking power and being able to govern and understanding what it takes to do this. But this political party was invited to participate in a conference that involved a lot of different folk who were part of an overall parts of movement representing various iterations of our movement, some current at the time, some forces who had been really powerful and significant in the past. So the preface to this, the political aspects of building a mass movement, the tactical and strategic objectives for Black liberation was presented in April 1977 at a Black organizers conference at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Omali Yeshitela was asked by the conference sponsors to make a presentation on the political aspects of building a mass movement. And during the same period, the Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party had requested a paper from Chairman Yeshitela on the tactical and strategic objectives for liberation. We were working to solve the problems of the revolution inside the party. And the Central Committee had determined that I should do this paper on tactics and strategies to win liberation, not likes, not views, but to win liberation. And this paper should also help us to understand the significance of the duration, the long-term duration of the African People's Socialist Party, formally created in 1972, but coming from the immediate experience of the 1960s as a part of that revolutionary movement. And which means that we had custody of the whole history and struggle of that movement up to that time, and we moved and developed from that period. That's a really important thing. It's not like we just came into life as the party. At the moment some important event or some sensational event occurred. It's not like the party came into life when you were born, because most of you who are participating is much younger than this movement. When I say this movement, I'm talking about even this current iteration of this movement. And you need to know that there was a bus in motion when you were born, and that what the best thing possible would have been to jump on that bus, as opposed to stand there thinking that there is no transportation where it is that we're trying to go. And so the party has been here for more than 50 years. And the history of the party goes back further than that 50 years. And so we've been working, trying to solve the problem of the revolution since that time. It didn't just start now. 1. 2, what we will perhaps be able to talk about, and I've mentioned it in books that I've written, is that the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s was something that impacted in a very serious way the development of the theory, the philosophy of the African Revolution, that there were many questions that were being discussed. And even this that I'm presenting you was a response of the African People's Socialist Party to the fact of the ideological assault that had disrupted the development of the theory and politics of the African Revolution at that moment. And so, which was a really critical kind of thing. And embedded in this discussion is our theoretical assumptions And the objective, of course, is to bring everybody up to par and to help continue to develop this theory. Because theory does not fall out of the sky. And I don't care how many times you read the 4 books or 5 books, however many of the gospel, it will not provide you with the theory of liberation and freedom. And so this is an ongoing process of development. And the thing that helps this is practice. Being engaged in change in the world requires us to examine the world as it really is. And it requires us to be able to constantly investigate what it is, the conclusions we came to before by the practice that we're involved in now. We tried this and it didn't work. The movement tried this and it didn't work, or tried this and it did work. Let's develop this, etc. So it's a dynamic process. But the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s stalled that process in some terms. The African People's Socialist Party continued to exist, and existence is a condition for development. You can't develop if you don't exist. Movements can't develop if they don't exist. And so that's why we find situations of movements always trying to start afresh, start anew, because they were not a part of a process of development. So I've talked about in the past how as a consequence of the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s, that people who were around at that time, who were pushed for whatever reasons or another out of the process of political organizing and activity, and they were locked in that period of where it was they were pushed out. So you had people who, for example, many courageous, brave, bold, dedicated freedom fighters went to prison. But the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s was so complete almost that it took all kinds of people in prison, and they're going to prison. This dislocated them. This took them out of the overall process of a revolutionary movement that was trying to solve the problems of the revolution and of the African society. What problem then? If the whole movement is in prison, then what is much of the movement involved in doing now? Getting out of prison. Getting out of prison. There's not like there was a whole massive movement. The party was here. We were the ones that brought the whole question of political prisoners and prisoners of war and kept it alive. And you will see evidence of that even in this document that we are talking about. But if you have a situation where people are taken out of the social life in that way and locked into social parameters defined by being in prison, then most of the concentrated work is to get out of prison or to make things better while in prison. And so you don't have a movement now that's struggling to free our political prisoners. Often it's just their families. Often it's who they can locate through the behind prison bars, who are not necessarily parts of revolution. In fact, most instances are not part of revolution. They may be students. They may be doing other kinds of things. There may be sympathizers. There may be white militants, white leftists, etc. You're writing and you're communicating. You're trying to get them to do something, but you are in prison. You're not even in part of a process that's struggling with the white people who you want to do something. You just know they're great because they will help to do something to get you out of prison. Do you understand? So I'm saying your consciousness is locked and development is distorted. But the party has this 50-year history of continuous development, and inside the African People's Socialist Party is custody of the revolutionary project of more than 50 years. I wanted to say that. And it's really important because there's like a time warp that many of our people who are in our movement got locked into that. And Malcolm did say this. And Lumumba did say this, and others did say this, but there was also work, progress, development that was occurring since they said and did that, either confirming, giving us an opportunity to develop on what it was they said, but certainly not just being born anew. Here is what they said and go from here. There's this process that we as the African People's Socialist Party are part of, and we've been engaged in trying to forward the revolutionary project, the revolutionary process. And this is what we're talking about now. And so the party assumed this responsibility. You know, when so many of our forces, beloved forces, people who I love so much and who I worked with even when they were in prison, who I visited even when they were in prison, who I referenced when I was involved in trying to build movements to free people who were in prison. But the movement to try to free the people in prison, we always recognized had to be a movement that did what? That informed the revolutionary project to overturn the system that put them in prison. All right? Anyway, so the resulting paper, The Political Aspects of Building a Mass Movement, the Tactical and Strategic Objectives for Black Liberation, was consciously written as a general and uniting strategy for the African Liberation Movement. This is the party trying to give leadership to the overall African Liberation Movement that writes this paper here. And it makes assumptions based on the fact that this is not the part, this is the party trying to provide leadership for a fragmented movement that has come under assault, with many people still in prison, many people having lost a connection with the ideological philosophical assumptions that gave rise to the revolutionary movement of the last period. So it was approved by the African People's Socialist Party and has informed and guided the party's practice since then. The presentation at Amherst was well received and united with by the participants, which represented virtually every legitimate expression of the independence movement. They included Robert Williams, the first president of the Republic of New Africa, Reverend Charles Coins from Cairo, Illinois, who built the United Front in that city. And this was not just a United Front, how it may be easily understood, but these were people who had to fight for their lives and were engaged in actual armed conflict and struggle as Cairo was under assault by a whole white population right across the river. The revolutionary nationalist Ella Baker, who was the creating genius of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, representatives from the African People's Party, and its founding member Akbar Muhammad Ahmed, as he was known at the time, representatives from the Institute of the Black World, and many others. The presentation was, this presentation was serialized in one of the publications that we were producing at the time as the party. In the August 1977, volume 5, number 1, September 77, volume 5, number 2, and et cetera, in the Brenningspear newspaper. And it generated a lot of discussion because people were trying to find solutions to this. And in fact, when this paper was written, I was in the middle of a movement that we had created, located, centered in Atlanta, Georgia, the Free Desert Woods. And I came back from Amherst to a mass rally that we had organized. And I'm not sure, and a lot of people were at that rally. And when I raised the thing about tactics and strategy for liberation that I had just been talking about, there was an audible exclamation that came from the audience like, yeah, that's what we need, right? So it was reprinted in pamphlet form in 1979, and it's been requested in a lot of different times since that time. So that's something about the history of it, and hopefully this will help us now as we begin on page 8, looking at the second part of this discussion and this class right now. So in talking about building a mass movement, it's really important to understand that mass movements need to be informed by something. To what end? What in the hell is a mass movement about? And that says something about how it's to be built. And of course, if you're a revolutionary organization, a mass movement will be informed by the need to solve the problem of the revolution, to take the revolution forward. So page 8, under the subhead, may be built through coalition. That is to say, mass movement. A mass movement then may be built through a coalition or united front effort of the leading pro-independence forces. And you see here, we say not just anybody, because we're not trying to solve some general contradiction. We're trying to solve the problem of the revolution. And we solved the problem of a revolution that had characterized itself primarily as struggling against colonialism or for independence. And So we say a mass movement then may be built through a coalition or united front effort of the leading pro-independence forces organized around general principles of minimum unity with their basis in an attempt to realize a common strategic objective of establishing the leadership of our general independence movement. Why would we say establishing the leadership of the independence movement? Because that was the struggle that had been militarily defeated. They didn't raid the NAACP offices. Even though they had killed King, they weren't raiding Southern Christian Leadership Conference offices. They didn't have masses of these forces in prison, assassinating them after King. So then what we are talking about is in killing Malcolm and even killing King. And King was dangerous because he had this extraordinary influence that he had over colonized masses of the people. And because he was not in the absolute grips of the colonial ruling class. He was not like those who followed him, who claimed to be his adherents and what have you. He was different in that, and a very principled person, even if he represented a particular class that was not prepared to take the revolution to its conclusion in terms of actual power for the people. But the problem was, because of his connection with the people, he was susceptible to pressure from the masses of the people who wanted to go beyond simply sitting on the toilet, as Malcolm X said, next to white people. And so he was dangerous, he was a threat, and so he had to be eliminated. So here we have, with the murder of Malcolm, with the assault that was being made on the Black Panther Party, the assault that was being made on revolutionary organizations, including JOMO, SNCC, that I was involved in, it was not just a physical assault, but it was an assault on the philosophy, on the ideology that was propelling us to actual freedom. So now you can read about Black people, but you can't read about Malcolm. In fact, they end up turning Malcolm into a civil rights advocate, right? And one of the most popular photos of all opportunities in the world is a picture of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King standing next to each other, shaking hands. They met once. And that's the only photo. And Malcolm was a serious critic of that movement, which is not to say that he didn't come to certain kinds of conclusions about the ability to work with that movement. And in fact, he intended to provide leadership for it, said it, before they killed him. So this was, we're talking about establishing the leadership now, taking the leadership back that has been conferred on the integrationists, the assimilationists, the petty bourgeoisie that's been stuck or put in charge of Black people. Malcolm X used to define them, this group of people, as these stooges, like he said, with a cigar in his mouth with fire on one end and a fool on the other. And so this is what we are contending with. We're not just saying that this is a bad person. We're not just talking about Jesse Jackal because he's that, or Reverend Charlatan because he's that, but he also is representative of a philosophy and a direction that would take African people into the swamps. So we are resurrecting. The struggle is to resurrect the leadership of a whole movement, a whole tendency in the African liberation movement. You with me on that? And you have to be conscious of that. If you're not conscious of that, then you get in bed with forces who make have militant discussions and stuff like that, but they ain't even planning to go in the same direction that our revolution was going in. In fact, their intent is to take it someplace else, but you like them because they like you. And anyway. So let's see. I'm struggling, as you can see. I'm having a few issues just commanding my capacity. So a tactic for realizing the strategic objective of establishing the leadership of the independence movement may also be the creation of National Black Independence Party. Maybe. This can mean several things, depending on time and place and the political conditions. for and aspirations held by a particular political formation, which will have to make the determination of what building a national Black independence party means. I say this can mean several things because it can be interpreted to mean that we need a mass or political, a popular political party that only has independence on its agenda. On the other hand, a political formation which feels it has overcome the amateurishness, lack of political clarity, and is sufficiently rooted among the masses with a cadre of advanced fighters, may conclude that it is a vanguard national independence party already in existence, and may therefore see the creation of a national independence party as building a mass movement to realize political independence. And I said some things that should be informative here, because some people have struck out at certain times to make this revolution on their own. But we said that we say that a political formation which feels it has overcome the amateurishness, the lack of political clarity, and is sufficiently rooted among the masses of the people. These are some things that informs what it is that you want to do, where you're trying to go at any given time, right? Yeah. Such an advanced political formation would see political independence as a necessary tactic for realizing socialism, and dependent on its worldview, achieving a united socialist Africa necessary in the long run for independence to be meaningful to our efforts to provide a material base for qualitatively changing the conditions of our life. Then there will be some, you see, I'm talking to this group here. This is the party who's talking to these groups. There's an act of seduction that's also at work here. People coming here from different directions, from their own histories, etc., but not necessarily having summed up the process that brought us to this meeting. And part of which was the defeat of the Black Revolution, military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s. Ideological assault that's been made on our movement that we have to be fighting against even as we move forward with the struggle. We engage in ideological battle. I understood that, right? So then there will be some who will interpret the need to build a national Black independence party as meaning that all the present political formations which now call themselves parties are indeed too primitive to deserve the label, and that we are therefore talking about finding the formula for bringing the most progressive pro-independence formations together to struggle over the questions necessary to find unity in order to establish ourselves as one party. The African People's Socialist Party has been engaged in this struggle for a long time, even through JOMO, the Brenningsville newspaper. They're trying to build and consolidate this whole force that could make this revolution. We, the African People's Socialist Party, had tried to initiate a process through which some of the forces that were known as pro-independence movement would come together with the African People's Socialist Party consolidated as one political party. And we did so many different things to make that happen, including utilization of mass movement. We built the African National Reparations National Prison Organization with the assumption that this would be something that all the pro-independence movement could participate in collectively, so that these ideological differences did not have to hold supremacy, right? What held supremacy was the fact that everybody agreed that reparations, Black people wanted reparations in the so-called movement. Everybody agreed that we need to get these prisoners out of prison, and to have a movement dealing with the question of Black people in prison. This was what everybody seemed to agree with. And so we pulled together this process that would allow for the emergence of a coherent collective will that's expressed in the form of a political party. And I was having meetings with different forces and say, let's put it all together and build one party. Did that. And it didn't work out like that, because part of the reason it didn't work out like that was the class question. Because the JOMO that was the driving force the African People's Socialist Party coming to existence recognized that the critical issue, the leading force, the most dynamic force in the history was the working class. This is where all the value was created, not just for Black people in America, but value throughout the whole world was created by Africans who were forced laborers, enslaved people. That's why the whole notion of slavery is so misunderstood and working class so misunderstood. Because if what Africans who were enslaved are doing are workers, then who are the white people who got jobs as a consequence of presiding over our slavery? If I'm a worker, then who the hell are you? If you're the worker, who the hell am I? In fact, we have a colonial relationship that cannot be resolved with making more wages or having better benefits on the job. That's like being in prison and assuming that African people who are in prison are just unpaid workers. Because the solution there, as we used to say all the time in the movement, go to prison, get a job. There was full employment under slavery. So now you can get paid. And we've seen movements that say what has to happen is we recognize Africans who are in prison as unpaid workers. But damn, if that's the case, there has been a 500% increase of Black workers since the 1960s in the prison system. Are we to understand then the only thing is give them a job, give them a pay for it, health benefits, etc.? No. The process that keeps shoveling these Africans behind bars, that system has to be under assault. Do you see? Yeah. So, ideological clarity is really important, and this whole question of tactics and strategy is important too. And I feel Director Akile breathing down my neck now in terms of the time that's being exhausted in this process up to now. Let's see. Where am I? Can somebody tell me where I'm on page 9, aren't I? Somebody's reading this.
Her Chairman, you are on page 9 on the second to last paragraph. So for the purpose.
And is that the one that says for the purpose of this discussion?
Yes.
On the political aspects of building a mass movement, it is not overly important at this juncture whether we see ourselves as the party, or whether we see the need to set up a process to build the party. The main thing here is that we understand the need for giving concrete day-to-day leadership to the struggle of our people and see the potential for using a national Black political party for the vehicle. And this was one of the problems that we had, is because though they were connected to different sectors of the ruling class, liberal sector often, the assimilationists, the integrationists could give the appearance of solving problems, practical problems that people have. They could fight for and lead around different kinds of things happening to Black people. But too often the so-called nationalist pro-independence forces had our activities circumscribed by the ideological and philosophical limitations that we found ourselves without actually engaging in practice to change the conditions of the people. When we were being successful too often after the defeat of the revolution, military defeat, we found ourselves gauging our success by the number of ceremonies we could have in these storefronts, these darkened storefronts, candlelit ceremonies, learning Swahili, all this other kind of stuff that did not take on the actual practical issues and struggles defining the lives of an oppressed, colonized people. So we say,
However, if we are to continue talking about establishing the leadership of the independence movement as a strategic objective to guide our work in building a mass movement, we must clearly be prepared to take the offensive on mass issues. Therefore, for it to be viable and a mass movement, in fact, it cannot be simply a movement of the already faithful few. To guarantee that it is not, we must be prepared to assume the people's offensive on mass issues. In the past, this has been a grave error of the general independence movement. We have held our storefront rituals, dressed in our fashionable dashikis, practiced our most elaborate handshakes, but failed to take the offensive on the most pressing problems confronting our people. Then we have been disappointed, disgusted, and amazed when our people followed the integrationists or did not easily identify with our philosophical pronouncements. On the other hand, when we have attempted to provide practical leadership, we have often begun our work from the level of our own ideological development, based on our own organizational conclusions, which do not necessarily correspond with the underdeveloped worldview held by masses of our people. Consequently, rather than providing leadership for the people, we separate ourselves from the people. Clearly, this is not assuming the offensive. It is ultra-leftist posturing, and objectively speaking, it is detrimental to our struggle and serves the forces of imperialism and continued African oppression. So, and then just read a bit further. Our politics is meaningless if it is not tied to a process to better the material life of our people. And what I'm simply saying is that the process does not begin after liberation. It must begin now if there is to be liberation. The people will not follow us simply because, like Ford, that was a slogan of the Ford company at the time, we have a better idea. Amilcar Cabral was correct when he said, always bear in mind that the people are not fighting for ideas for the things in anyone's head. They are fighting to win material benefits, to live better and in peace and see their lives go forward to guarantee the future for their children. Unquote. This should tell us then that there must be unity of theory and practice, that the mass movement we are talking about building must be tied to the material needs and struggles of our people to this world, struggles of our people in this world. Our theory must be capable of leading the day-to-day struggles, of being tested in the real world. It is, if we are incapable of truly serving the people, if our theory prohibits through its inadequacies, giving practical leadership, assuming the offensive around the life and death struggles, then we are undeserving of the people's confidence. And the people will not follow us, and there will be no real independence within our lifetime. And this should help us to understand the significance of the Black Power blueprint. It's not asking people to be revolutionary. It's taking on the life and death struggles of the people under the leadership of a revolutionary party, utilizing this to establish our leadership on the one hand, and to establish this relationship with the people that gives us the opportunity at the same time to take the science of revolution to the people. This we use also to help win the people to independence. We help to put forth a process that negates in a practical way the influence and impact and significance of the colonizers, and then replace that significance under the leadership of the party in the hands of the African working class, the masses of Black people. All right? So taking the issue, offensive on mass issues. And it is important because sometimes people can only get excited about adrenaline pumping stuff, like somebody just got killed. People are starving. People are starving at the same time that this cop killed this person. People were starving. People had no ability to feed, clothe, and house themselves. People were thrust into prisons on a regular basis. You see one manifestation of that can get you pumped up. But the fact is, we got no power over our own lives, on any aspect of our lives. That's what killed that brother. That's what killed that sister. And so we put together a program that brought, with the intention of drawing masses of African people into a process of feeding, clothing, and housing ourselves, and then helping to arm people with a particular consciousness so it becomes clearer that this brother is killed in order to maintain this dependency, colonial dependencies that we are confronted with on a regular basis. And the force that moves to solve that problem is the African Working Class Party, right? Okay. So taking the offensive or mass issues cannot be done in a one-sided way. If we are serious about establishing the leadership of the independence movement as a strategic objective to guide our work in building a mass movement. When we talk about establishing the leadership of the independence movement, we must be talking about our leadership as opposed to all other leadership. When we talk about establishing the leadership of the independence movement, we're talking about the leadership of the independence movement as opposed to all other movement. When I say all other movement, I'm talking about the white people who love you, the white leftists who will help you get out of prison, the white formations who engage in struggling against fascism and all of that, the independence of Black people. That's the fundamental question. And once you lock in on that, then it helps you to understand the question of fascism and all these other questions. And it says something to you about what relationship we have to have with all these other forces that we're dealing with. All the white people, it doesn't matter that they like you. Because it's easy to like a slave as long as the slave is not resisting. All the white people that I've heard reference to over the last few days loved us until, loved Black people except us. I remember the times when some of the people we had yesterday in one of the events that was done under the general leadership of our movement, this brother who spent a whole bunch of time in prison, almost 5 decades in prison. And I remember a time when we were working to get those people out of prison, to bring attention to what put them there and what had to be done to mobilize to get them out of there. And what we were building, I remember this event that we had at the prison where George Jackson, where the courthouse, where Jonathan Jackson was killed, and some others, Marin County Courthouse. And we called for that mobilization and to have people come out. And we said we want all the Africans to come out, and then we want the white people to do is what? Go to the white community on this day. Don't come to the thing that we're doing at the prison. Go to the white community, do events there, win white people to unity with the struggle of Black people to deal with this prison question and colonialism. They went to the prison, told the Africans who were locked up that we were somehow attacking their white allies. And then we had Africans who are now attacking us, physically threatening to harm us, to do bodily harm to us based on that. Because what got misled, what got misplaced, what was not understand that the objective had to be to win the leadership of the pro-independence movement. If we are going to be free, then we're going to have to lead that struggle. You know, we appropriated the slogan that came from ZANU, the Zimbabwe African National Union, when it was relatively close to being a revolutionary organization in Rhodesia, that came to be known as Zimbabwe. We are our own liberators. Some people hear that based on this racial politics that say if we are our own liberators, that means we don't like white people and we don't want white people. No, that ain't what it means. It means that we have the responsibility for our own liberation, and anybody else who works with us then do that in the name of our freedom. They would have to do that under the terms set by us. But if you ain't got no terms, you can't do that. If you don't have strategic objectives that you're trying to accomplish, you can't do that. So anything becomes your strategy. Everything is your strategy now. You know, when you talk about strategy, you're talking about long-term objectives. When you're talking about tactics, you're talking about what you do to achieve those long-term objectives. And knowing the difference of the two is what contributes to us not being opportunists, because an opportunist does what? Sells out the long-term interests of the working class for the benefit of the petty bourgeoisie or some other social force. So what you end up doing is you never have long-term interest. Your long-term interest is always your short-term interest. Getting out of prison becomes your long-term interest. That's your only interest. That's the main interest. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not talking about the intentions of the people who are involved in this. I'm not talking about whether they have good intentions or not. Somebody once said that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So the science is what we are struggling for, and that's why we talk about tactics and strategy, but not just any tactics and strategy, but tactics and strategy that informed by scientific understanding of what it is that we are dealing with, and that's what African internationalism does. So, therefore, we must be capable of and prepared to wage continuous ideological struggle while taking the offensive on mass issues. The ideological struggle should presently identify as main targets the following forces in order of importance. When was this written? 1977? 1. Our primary target for ideological struggle is the U.S. North American ruling class, as this is the enemy most responsible for the barbaric treatment of our people and upon whose system colonialism depends. We must, without let up, strike our main ideological blows here. Our ideological struggle against the main enemy should be anti-imperialist and anti-colonialist, as imperialism and this colonialist tactics, we call it the tactics, we have to do better than that, are responsible for our conditions of life. And part of what this says is that colonialism is born of imperialism. That's another story altogether that we can talk about. Because Lenin gave what is probably the most recognized in leftist circles definition of imperialism as something that is capitalism developed to its highest, form. What we say that capitalism came about as a consequence of empire. Empire is what you initiated the process of colonization. The word imperialism stems from the word what? Empire, right? And so, but as the colonizers, all of the colonizers were part of empire. When I say part of empire, they were rooted in the conditions and the social consciousness stemming from this process of empire that sent colonizers out to the world and began to define history from that process. You look at most of them, the beginning of history is associated with this process of empire that comes from Europe, and they call it trade, by the way, to other places. They say this massive trade is what gave birth to capitalism. That's part of what they talk about. What is the massive trade that they're talking about? We will say more about that moving forward. So we say the second related most important target for ideological struggle should be directed against the Black primitive petty bourgeois collaborators. These collaborators represent colonialism's first line of defense within the dispersed U.S. North American colony. And it's not just within the North American colony. That's one of the things that made the Mau Mau such a despised force by the petty bourgeoisie. The Kenyan Land Freedom Army, Uhuru, was not just something that frightened the death of colonizers who were in Kenya and every place in Africa. Uhuru, freedom. That was the slogan demand that came from the Kenyan Land Freedom Army. And they never hesitated to wipe out the collaborators, the Black collaborators who worked with the British colonizers, etc. So although the primitive petty bourgeoisie collaborators often give lip service to improving the lives of our people, their solutions are always those which would strengthen the present system and guarantee our continued servitude. If we are to establish the leadership of the independence movement, we must necessarily expose the bankruptcy of primitive petty bourgeois collaborators. And sometimes people don't intend to be working with the primitive petty bourgeoisie, but with the defeat of the African Revolution and this ideological leadership, then what we find is that the oppressed often borrows philosophy from the oppressor. So instead of talking about destroying, crushing, bulldozing, wiping out the prison system, and we take that the prisons in this country and much of the world as representative of the relationship we have with colonialism, we try to find a way to make prisons better. We recharacterize prison as unpaid workers go to jail, get a job. And so with that being the case, then we, raise up the conditions of African people in this country by just fighting to get them paid while in prison. I remember Comrade Sundiata made this struggle with me some years ago because I came up with this magnificent formula dealing with the question of prisons, about how the prisons should be used to accommodate Black families who can live with the comrades in the prison. So now I said, what the hell are you talking about, man? Improving the conditions in the prison. No, if you're going to do anything, find a way to let the prison system allow you to bring in hacksaws and dynamite and stuff like that. You don't try to accommodate the damn prison system. You don't accommodate colonialism, you destroy it. Even white friends who found in the prison system. Even if your cousin, your uncle is the warden or works in the prison system got to go, right? Tear it down, destroy it, free them all. Yeah, free them all in the process of destroying the system. So we say that the third target for ideological struggle is the ideological imperialists. These are the U.S. North Americans who call themselves socialists and communists, but who deny the right of African people to be led by our own advanced fighters, by liquidating the nationalist character of our movement, obscuring the colonial contradiction, raising the secondary contradiction between African people and our relations to production to a primary contradiction and seizing hegemony of our movement. Some people will find some contradiction here because I'm in fierce struggle with a lot of so-called white left forces. It's a principle struggle. They're just gonna have to get on the right side of the damn question. That's all it is to it. I'm not trying to, at this point, wipe them out or something. It's a principle struggle, and somebody said, well, you work with white people. Yes. And what we have are white organizations who for all practical purposes have created Black organizations. There are Black organizations that have come into existence to contend with the party. I can name them. Their basis of existence is contention with the party. They would steal our ideas. They would do all these other kinds of things to substitute genuine revolutionary class-based leadership of the African, working class-based leadership of the African Revolution. And they are funded by, supported by those white forces who have the same struggles who have these struggles with us, because they don't want the African working class to lead either. They are opposed to obvious revolution that will overturn the colonial relationship, because overturning colonialism means overturning them. You see? So they will fund and say, well, you work with white people and they raise money for you because I see you doing reparations work. Yes, we do work with white people. We created them. We organized them as a part of our strategy to win liberation and helping them to understand that you have no freedom as long as colonialism exists, and that when you work to destroy the colonial mode of production, you work to attack your own system of oppression and exploitation. We want you to have a different approach to what might be characterized as morality. We're talking about African internationalist morality, not some bourgeois morality. Not the morality that Diderot wanted to destroy when he said that it only can be free when the last king is strangled with the intestines of the last priest. That was the morality that Diderot, that was bourgeois morality. That at the time it was feudal morality that feeds into the system right now that we're talking about. Y'all with me? Yes. I talk a long time because there's so many examples, and most people don't have the advantage of these struggles and how they matured and the history of the process that brought us to this place right here. That's one of the things that's so significant about the African People's Socialist Party, because the history of our revolution is concentrated in this party. I don't even have to be here. In fact, you can just go back and read the political reports that we've been writing now for 50 years. It's necessary to elaborate because there's a relationship between practice and theory. And we have to continue to refresh our own movement, our own party, our own movement with the evidence of the practice. This is what happened in life. This is how we deal with this question in practice. And this informs us about how we deal with every question. I know a lot of smart people, smart-ass people. Some people who join the party, some people who are quote-unquote African nationality, they're so damn smart. They really are smart, much smarter than I know that. And they know how to do some stuff I don't know how to do. But they don't have the advantage of the history, the practice that's concentrated inside this African People's Socialist Party that took us to certain places, that actually brought them into political life. So that happens outside the party, that happens inside the party, but we're having this discussion in part so that we arm the party, arm the movement, and be able to take this understanding out into the world. Because not only must Africans understand this, we're talking about a worldview. We're talking about a consciousness that must be infused throughout the population of the world. If we're going to have freedom, we got to knock down a lot of stuff to get there. So our ideological, while imperialism has clearly been the biggest danger to our people, in the most recent period, the ideological imperialists have represented the greatest danger to our movement and have smashed several Black militant organizations who incorrectly saw them as class allies. They did. All kinds of Black organizations were wiped out, destroyed, conflict based on the intervention of white allies, white so-called supporters, etc., who had their own, and this is what must really be understood, that philosophy is not innocent. You can talk about Marxism, you can talk about this or that. People come to philosophical conclusions and develop philosophical outlooks based on the needs of the societies within which they exist. And there's one need, there are several needs that are informed by feudalism that took white people in a particular direction in terms of philosophical development. And it was limited based on the fact that those people, as smart as they were, as advanced, if you will, as they were, they could not see the colonial question because colonialism gave birth to them, gave birth to their consciousness and what have you, and how they could perceive the world. But it also gave birth to us. And it gave birth to a consciousness of how we see the world if we can free ourselves from the worldview of those who benefit from our oppression and exploitation. You see? Yeah. So Marx was a nice guy. We may say something about that in this process, how nice he was. And I believe that. I believe he's a really smart guy. But he had a consciousness informed by his own history, his own relations to production, his relationship to production. And what was the relationship that Marx had to production? Europe had to production. It was the Europeans, the people who became Europeans. In fact, they became Europeans in this process, ownership of the means of production, and the Africans and the colonized people being part of what was owned and the producers of what was produced that they owned. So once we come to contact with our own reality, our own consciousness is informed by that, and we have a philosophy that defines the world based on the interests of those who are colonized, not on the interests of those who are colonizers, even the good colonizers. You with me on that? Because I've heard people say that there were some things characterized as nice slave owners. And you will hear that. In fact, I'm seeing more movies and things like that being produced that talks about the nice slave owners. Takes you back in the past and stuff, how pretty Black women, etc., who go back in the past, and they're these nice slave owners and who did things for us except commit suicide. So our ideological struggle against the ideology, and that's what we call for. We call for the commission of national suicide because the colonizer, the national consciousness and well-being, the resources, the economy of the colonizers, the sense of sameness of the colonizers that constitute what we call nation, came as a consequence of slavery and colonialism. So in order for us to be free, we got to destroy that relationship. And for the colonizers, white people get on the right side of the question, they have to commit national suicide. A consciousness, a concept of nationality, nationhood that came about as a consequence of colonialism. You with me? It ain't complicated. It just seems complicated because you have to swim through so much sewage, so much muck and mire to get there. That's been imposed on us by colonialism. So our ideological struggle against the ideological imperialists must be waged constantly, consciously, and conscientiously while struggling to overcome the primitive petty bourgeois collaborators within our communities. We must erect an ideological barrier at the borders of our community, which will make it impossible for the ideological imperialists to penetrate, make it impossible for them to penetrate. The ideological struggle waged against the ideological imperialists must be characterized by revolutionary nationalist content, African internationalism, really. It must sharply and unceasingly put forward the ideological basis for our revolutionary nationalist politics, African internationalism. It must do this scientifically and principally. We must not have a mechanical approach to waging ideological struggle against these three main targets while building a mass movement. I am not suggesting that when we struggle against one of these forces, we restrict our ideological combat to one aspect and change when we combat another. All of our ideological struggle during the present period, which is characterized by the relative weakness of the independence movement, should contain each of these three elements I have mentioned. However, the determination of which of these forces at a particular time would demand the sharpest struggle would also determine the emphasis we put on a particular element of our ideological struggle. Another strategic objective for winning independence, which should guide our work, is to win support for the independence position within current U.S. borders. Win support for the independence position, not to help get somebody out of prison, not just to help in integration, not just to destroy what they like to refer to as racial, what do you call this environmental stuff that happens in our community. But we have to win support for the independence position. That's what we're struggling for all the time. Don't support me because you like the kind of music I play, or because you think that black people are cute or not. But the independence position is what we are struggling to win. You must unite with our right as a people. And there's something wrong with you if you can't unite with the right of African people to have what every dignified human population wants, that is to be free and independent. Then something wrong with you. Don't tell me that you can't support me because I don't believe in integration, or because my position on Roe versus Wade is not the same one that you have. Independence is the question. That's the thing that we are pursuing. Like Ho Chi Minh said, once upon a time, there's nothing more precious than freedom and independence. And sometimes people like to refer to us as black separatists. I heard somebody say that the FBI raised the question about why we a black separatist group like the party or the Uhuru movement would be working for the Russians. First of all, if you heard anything that I've said up to now, we don't work for nobody. You understand? And secondly, this whole characterization of being black separatists is an assault. It's an ideological assault. It's slander. Because when the white people stole this land that they called the United States and put together a declaration of such theft, they didn't call it a declaration of separation. They called it a declaration of independence. And to say that it's separatist, is a subjective response to the fact that black people want to be independent, and it's telling all the white people that they saying something wrong with you. It's like something we talked about earlier, that some cartoonist has been declared unfit because some right-wing people said that the majority of black people, according to their poll, think that it would not be good to be white. That's a subjective thing that he's getting people involved in. They want you to be dealing with subjective, and there's a difference in subjective assumptions and objective reality. And subjective is what's in your head, and objective is what's in the world. And if what's in your head does not agree with what's really in the world, you got a problem. And sometimes they'll come for you with straitjackets and lock you up and do other kinds of things with you, and they will give you all kinds of medications and stuff to subdue this separation between the subjective and objective. Of course, there's always a contradiction between subjective and objective, but to the extent that it's possible, we struggle for what's in the world to really inform what's in our brain, right? Yeah. So another strategic objective for winning support, for winning independence, which should guide our work, is to win support for the independence position within current U.S. borders. And because we have been bogged down with primitive race politics, as opposed to revolutionary nationalist politics, African internationalism, some of us will reject the idea of winning support for the independence movement within current U.S. borders. Some will see winning support as meaning the same as winning acceptance, which is the slavish philosophy put forth by the integrationists. However, I assure you there's a distinctive difference. To win acceptance correctly implies capitulation, non-struggle, and national self-abasement. But winning support means political persuasion, ideological struggle, and principled political relations which respond to a convergence of interests and a commitment to socialist and international morality. Because when we say socialist, we recognize that socialism cannot be achieved except by what? Assaulting colonialism. Struggling to win support for the independence position as a strategic objective for independence through self-liberation will help to sharpen our ideological development, smash the narrowness of our worldview, and demand continuity of our principles of unity. The main target for this effort to win support for the independence position should be the general anti-imperialist forces within current U.S. borders, other oppressed, subject, and colonized nationalities, and progressive North Americans. And you know, this is why I'm saying that we do have serious struggles, like with the so-called anti-imperialist white left and whatever, but we struggle. And this is what our objective is, and we say, this is what you need to support. And they say, well, you know, there's, you know, black people got different kinds of positions. You know, we don't know, we can go with you or go with that group. I say, hell, the truth of the matter is Ukrainians got different kinds of positions, right? And when you were looking at Vietnam, there were different positions in Vietnam, right? It didn't stop you from choosing what side you were going to be on. Cubans got different positions, right? And said, yeah, there are different positions in the African community, and you have enough sense and talent to know which position speaks to liberation and which position continues our lives as colonized, subjective people. Ain't that right? That's bullshit, isn't it? We don't know what to do. I mean, y'all got so many different positions and shit like that. Didn't stop you from supporting the revolutionary movement of the Vietnamese. You had whole massive demonstrations, thousands, hundreds of thousands, on some occasions. Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam is going to win. It was Ho Chi Minh. You recognize where the leadership came from. You were Fidel and not Batista, right? This is the reality, and people had those abilities to make those choices, and they have the ability to make the choice here. But the choice here is fundamentally contradictory, because this overturns the whole system upon which everything, all the colonizers have, is based on their continued exploitation of the colonized. Every dream, every hope, every aspirations. Anyway, I hope I'm not. Let's see. Okay, so we say that I cannot overstate the importance of this as a strategic objective, for I believe that in the absence of such a clearly defined objective to our work, and because of the generally sloppy theoretical work of our movement, which marked the recent past, we made many errors which could have been avoided. We cannot control the North American left movement, and therefore we cannot assume responsibility for its errors, but we can and must control our movement, and we must understand that its errors are our own. I would like to share an example of what I believe to be an error generally promoted by the petty bourgeois dominated US North American left and often parroted by our movement in the absence of having a stated strategic objective to the goal of winning support for the independence position within current US borders. It is in the first place a theoretical error, which leads to incorrect practice. This error consists of the premise that ours is a struggle against racism, quote unquote, and imperialism. Immediately, it is sometimes difficult to see this error since we have for such a long time, under the philosophical dominance of the primitive petty bourgeoisie, been fighting against racism. But since we have advanced and since we have become materialist, we understand the primacy of matter over mind, don't we? We understand the primacy of matter over mind. Yes, we do, even if we want to pretend sometimes that we don't. You know, we understand the primacy of matter of mind, and especially when somebody reminds you that mind is a product of matter that's developed to a pretty high development, right? Mind comes from the brain. Matter, the brain is matter. And you cannot even think of, in your present state, the existence of mind without the brain. And we know that you know that's the case. And that's why, you know, this whole issue, if, you know, you want to change somebody's mind, you know, we can stop the process of mind. It happens all the time. You know, cut off the machine. You know, you want to prove it? Want to prove it? Let's take an experiment. Which is primary, mind or matter? Let's have an experiment. Here, take this gun and shoot yourself in the head, and then tell me what you think about it. Yeah. So there's a distinctive difference. And so where are we now? So fighting against racism, but since we've advanced and become materialists, understand that the primacy of matter over mind, and we should be able to understand that racism, the attitude or ideas that the North American people have in their heads about African people cannot possibly be a principal contradiction. Moreover, we should understand that the only reason the ideas and attitudes that we identify as racism have any significance at all is because of the relationship African people have to the North American state. That relationship is characterized by the absence of political power over and self-determination for our own lives and existence. Such power and determination being in the hands of a foreign and alien state power, with the ability, because it does have state power, to define us as the same. Isn't that something? They say everybody's the same in America. So in the real world, this is called colonialism. And they get tricky because it becomes necessary for them to get trickier, because colonialism keeps coming into the discussion, because colonialism is something that just not happens here in the United States, it happens in the world. It's a mode of production. And so, like, to obscure the colonial question, they've got tricky, they've got cute. And they say, well, it's not just racism, it's not just the things in your head. They call it structural racism, or something to that, institutional racism. And what is institutional racism? But another way of saying colonialism. That the institutions that you talk about act a certain way, they act a certain way because the colonial power controls them, and as they impact on the whole world. It's institutional racism. We live in the same damn country in the United States, share the same general spaces, but it doesn't, it's not something that affects everybody the same way. It's not like COVID, where you have to, well, COVID doesn't either, but there's not a mask that you can put on to protect yourself from COVID, from institutional racism. So why does it affect me in this way, this institutional racism that you talk about? And it doesn't affect white people in the same way. If it's a generalized kind of contradiction, you misidentified the contradiction. You just don't want us to get to colonialism. That's why you say that. You don't want us to get to the question of power. That's why you say that. And as long as you're talking about racism, then it keeps it on a subjective level. And that we're always trying to get white people to like us. And I don't like it because there ain't no black people on the Kellogg's cereal box. Silliness. So in the real world, this is called colonialism. It results in real human suffering for the colonial subject. And because it is the basis for the social, political, and economic development of a colonizing nation, it results in arguments, ideas, and theories which explain its, that is to say, the colonizing nation to the rest of the world in a distorted and fanciful nature, designed to justify the relative position of the colonizer to the colonized in the real world. And I just want to say this because some people get confused often because they say, well, black people, do the same things white people do, etc. But the point is this, that there is an objective need for the colonizer to distort reality, to distort history. And there's an objective need for the colonized to get to the truth. There is such a thing as objective truth. And the thing is that the colonized are always in pursuit of objective truth, but sometimes can't get there because of this subjective cloud that has been imposed on everything, so that you see everything through the lenses of this subjectivism. They don't like me, George Bush don't like black people, or, this kind of stuff. And who gives a damn? Because George Bush does like black people. Somebody said he had a very close relationship with, what's her name, Rice, Condoleezza Rice. And I believe that all of them like black people, as long as we keep playing basketball and entertaining and stuff like that. It's just that they have this colonial relationship and they can like you as long as you submit to the colonial relationship. And that's even true of the white left and anti-imperialists. The question is, when you strike out on your own, saying black people will be free, the colonized will be free, and we unite that we are existing under colonial mode of production that sucks resources, life, hopes, aspirations, dreams from the colonizer and transfer all of those hopes, aspirations, life, etc. to the colonized. And they want to protect that relationship. And I'm not talking about, again, it's not even important about their intentions, because the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But what has to happen is that we have to be clear what our strategic objectives are, what it takes to win actual freedom for African people. And that must be informed by philosophy, revolutionary theory. I got to move forward, because I do feel Comrade Akili increasing. He's breathing harder and harder right down my back, to move this study on. So we say that, generally speaking, the attitudes and ideas held by U.S. North Americans relative to African people could not be otherwise given our colonial relationship with the North American people. How else can we explain the attitudes held by the intellectual giant Frederick Engels concerning the Irish people colonized by England, where Engels' family owned textile factories? In his book, The Conditions of the Working Class in England, published in 1845, Engels' State of the Irish. And by the way, he lived with an Irish woman. It was his partner. He lived with her, slept with her, got up, whatever that meant. And he says, this is what Engels says: with the Irish, feeling and passion predominate. Reason must bow before them. Their sensuous, excitable nature prevents the reflection and quiet, persevering activity from reaching development. Such a nation is utterly unfit for manufacture as now conducted. This is Engels. This is somebody who helped to develop the whole materialist philosophy. Who's making this statement? How the hell can he say that except for an objective relationship that England had with the Irish? Doesn't it sound just like he's talking about black people? If we didn't say Irish in there, you would think this is a statement that's being made by the colonizer about the Africans. Sensuous. Oh my goodness. And I'm not picking on Frederick Engels. Yeah. And so, such an unscientific statement from a man who made such gigantic contributions to the development of materialism is almost unbelievable. In one single statement, he has reduced the ability of an entire people to the condition of the feelings and passions, separating the feelings and passions of a people from the material conditions of their lives, and turning everything upside down by making the material conditions be dependent upon the passions and feelings rather than the other way around. So my point here is that the attitude and ideas held by the U.S. North American people, although constantly influenced by governmental policy and manipulated by ruling class opinion makers, have their basis in the historically evolved need of a society to explain its evolvement on stolen land based on slave labor. What else are you going to say? Well, we got everything, darling. Talking to your little child now. You're going to grow up, you want the child to be a wonderful human being too. You teaching children how to be moral and good, etc. And what you going to say? You know, darling, we have this wonderful country and we have everything. You can be anything you want because we stole all this stuff from the indigenous people and killed and committed genocide against them. And then we brought all these Africans over here and worked them to death and lynched them and created. Is that the explanation you're going to get? That's a description of the reality. That's what I'm talking about. It's the enslaved, the colonized, that has an objective relationship to truth and needs the truth in order to advance our struggle, and the colonizer who must falsify history. In order to live with himself, he has to do that. So we say that the premise that ours is a struggle against racism and imperialism is incorrect. Ours is a struggle against, we said that, didn't we? So where are we now? Can somebody help me? All right, so. What did you say?
After the premise, it's we can struggle against imperialism by struggling against colonialism.
Okay.
And then right above the picture that.
And this is on the page 17, is that right?
No.
On what page?
Page 16.
On page 16?
I thought that's
Okay, well, I'll mess with that. The premise that ours is a struggle against racism and imperialism is incorrect. Ours is a struggle against imperialism, which employs colonialism as its form of oppressive exploitation. We can struggle against imperialism by struggling against colonialism, which is a real condition in the real world. It has contradictions which often surface and which can be exploited politically. You know, Comrade Sister Betty Davis, she always talks about metaphysical imperialism, and some people don't know exactly what she's talking about. There's an assumption there that the ideas of imperialism has such an impact and influence, but that's what we call part of what we refer to as the superstructure of the social system, the ideas and the institutions and everything that flow normally and naturally from the economic base. Ours is a struggle against imperialism, which employs colonialism as a form of oppressive exploitation. We can struggle against imperialism by struggling against colonialism, which is a real condition in the real world. It has contradictions which often surface and which can be exploited politically. On the other hand, when we struggle against racism, we are struggling against ideas which are in the heads of the vast majority of European people. There is no identifiable source of political power to overcome, and the enemy must necessarily be viewed as a politically homogeneous and monolithic group of people who are racially unidentifiable and who have no political differences we can exploit, and who, because they are identified racially, represent a permanent condition which can never be overcome short of their extermination. This is not to say that the anti-American ideas in the heads of North Americans cannot harm us, but the ways in which they harm us are such that they serve to maintain our colonial relationship with the U.S. North American state. Therefore, it ought to be clear that what we generally refer to as racism is simply individual North Americans carrying out the U.S. policy of colonialism. It's a policy inside the United States. It's a condition, generally speaking, in terms of the colonial mode of production. So there are many U.S. North Americans who are justly concerned about the terrible anti-human ideas in the heads of their North American brothers and sisters. These ideas have allowed the North American people to justify their participation in the most barbaric acts against the peoples of other nationalities ever to be recorded in human history. For North American socialists, there is the question of socialist morality and a humane, just, post-capitalist culture for North American people. They are therefore justified when they say that they must struggle against the racism in their society as a priority. Did you know? Well, you know that this whole history of burning women, like Europe, just burning women, and there this thing, I forgot what its character, sawing women in half, hanging women, like by their feet, their heels, and then using actual saws even while they're alive to saw straight down the middle of women. Did you know that? I'm saying, it didn't get invented just when they met African people. This is stuff that was going on. And so anyway, where are we now? How are we doing, Comrade Director?
Chairman, I think that for the sake of...
Yeah, go ahead. You think what?
Well, we're under anti-human ideas justify barbarity under the second paragraph, right, the third paragraph. However, I was going to suggest that we finish this section up until page 20, where it says creating dual power. So we
up to page 20,
where it says creating dual power.
Okay, so I'm going back now to page what is it?
18. Paragraph 3. However, when our movement assumes responsibility for North American morality, we're dragged into error after error. I'm belaboring this point because I think it is fundamental to pushing our movement forward, as there is much confusion within our ranks on the question of the political reality presented to us by the existence and presence of white people and the relationship of our struggle to their existence and presence. Let us briefly go back to the question of a mass struggle around education as an example. We've already established that the independence movement, because it represents our advanced forces, should struggle differently than those who only see the surface or symptoms of the problem. No doubt, the independence movement would correctly raise the slogan Black community control of schools as a realizable goal to begin rectifying the attacks against our people in the education sphere as necessary to upgrade our education. This is 1977, clear. Hopefully this slogan will be raised not simply because we do not like white people, an attitude which for all its justification never solved the problem. Hopefully this slogan would be a recognition of the real purpose of education and the fact that to the degree possible, Black people, Black education should serve our own purpose, the purpose of liberation, independence, and development. But more importantly, we would also hopefully see such a slogan as being in correspondence with our colonial analysis and therefore contributing to the actual process of decolonization. Therefore, we would never initiate a mass march against racism as we saw occur in Boston on several occasions, which was really a horrific kind of thing that happened in Boston, where I'll never forget the picture of this African child marching for some kind of integration, and this white man snatching this American flag this child was carrying, and using like the flag as a weapon. Here's this child, this poor child, trying to hold on to this American flag. And there was something extremely symbolically significant about that. And we're talking about decolonization. Are you moving to end colonialism, or are you moving to destroy the plantation slavery, or to improve the conditions on the plantation? And of course, improving the conditions on the plantation is not a bad thing. It's if the objective is to take us to liberation. And even if the child had a red, black, and green flag, that would have a different kind of assumption associated with it
than the American flag. Carrying the American flag made certain assumptions about America being able to offer us freedom, etc. So we say that hopefully this slogan, that is to say, Black community control of the schools, hopefully this slogan would be raised not simply because we don't like white people. Hopefully this slogan would be in recognition of the real purpose of education and the fact that to the degree possible, Black education should serve our own purpose, the purpose of liberation, independence, and development. But more importantly, we would also hopefully see such a slogan as being in correspondence with our colonial analysis and therefore contributing to the actual process of decolonization. Therefore, we would never initiate a march against racism as we saw occur in Boston on several occasions, but we would march for control of our schools. A march which would be based on the same obvious contradictions which led to the march against racism. When we march against racism, we inadvertently march against all the white people in Boston, thereby liquidating the primary role of the U.S. North American ruling class and state. And we also obscure an important contradiction of imperialism, one which is at the heart of the antagonistic attitude held by North Americans against African people around the question of education. This is one example of education. Because when you see these people, the anti-imperialists and the white left will simply describe these as rednecks and, et cetera, because they don't like Black people. And, don't help me. You understand? Don't help me, because that's not even getting to the essence of the goddamn question. I don't care. We're not in some kind of thing where white people like us. The question is whether or not we can have freedom and control of our lives, our existence, the future of our people. So we say the contradiction is the necessary concentration of capital and power. I'm talking like this because the Marxists and white people like to talk like this. And power with the increasing development of imperialism, with the power generally located in the executive branch of government. We heard somebody talking about this over the last couple of days in different forums that we've been a part of. And this concentration of power moves to assume control of virtually every state-related institution in the country, including education. As the government moves to assume more control over these institutions, it causes for great alienation of the North American people from the institutions which used to serve them. More than anything, the anti-busing movement is an expression of that alienation. This is the thing that have white people climbing the walls of the Capitol. Once we understand this, it seems logical that we do not unite with our colonialist masters either on the right or the left by striking out at the U.S. North American working people whose actual power is revealed by their inability to determine which school their children will go to or whether they will go to school with African students. For the North American left, this era has grave consequences for the development of the struggle for socialist revolution in this country. When they identify the hatred, anguish, and social upheaval of the North American people around the educational question as simply racism, they liquidate the contradictions of imperialism. When they march against racism, although they call themselves supporting Black people, they actually align themselves with a sector of the U.S. North American ruling class against the interests of the North American workers, lack of a better term. Were they true socialists, they would unite with our call for Black community control of schools and raise the slogan of worker control of schools in the North American community. And the Black community control slogan would clearly show the North American workers that it is not African people who are taking their schools from them, thereby helping them to recognize their own class enemy, while the workers' control slogan would isolate the right-wing anti-busist forces like Louis Day Hitch, who are opposed to worker control of schools. To struggle against racism or for integration is a struggle for admittance into the system, and therefore leaves the system generally unattacked, as it must necessarily presuppose the system to be worthy of our desire for admittance. Such a struggle is actually a vindication and therefore an inadvertent perpetrator of the system, while a successful struggle against colonialism will mean the certain death of the system. Having the strategic objective of winning support of the independence position within with current U.S. Borders will help us to make a distinction between the North American people and the ruling class serving state. It will obviously serve to place our politics in objective alignment with our situation as it is in the real world. I believe we will have less difficulty in recognizing the tactical advantage of including within this strategic objective the necessity of winning the support of other subject, oppressed, and colonized nationalities. For it is within this sector, within current U.S. borders, where the contradictions are always sharpest and where the cutting edge of the internal struggle against U.S. imperialism presently lies. Uhuru. Yeah, yeah.
Uhuru, Chairman, Uhuru comrades, well, I want to salute an yet again incredible discussion around the tactics and strategy of Black liberation. And obviously we will be continuing this series. Well, this will really become a series and studying this document. And, we see its importance and the relevance to our situation today, the work that we have to carry out today, the analysis that was provided so long ago in 1977 being applicable to our current situation. And there is so much excitement again from the forces, in the chat, those who are watching. So I want to thank all of you for really, just participating and engaging with us in this discussion. Chairman wanted to let you know that Comrade Hector Mudo is on as well.
Uhuru compa.
Uhuru. So we're going to now move into some questions. But before we get into questions, we're going to actually take a look at announcements. But I just want to say, for those who have not put your question in, please log that into the chat right now. And also, some of you, I see your names, and I know that you asked questions last week, so we'll be taking those questions first today and trying to work through that order. So, but first, let's take a look at our movement announcements, which first kicks off: join the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party in the African liberation struggle. Donate or volunteer to the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Defense Campaign today. For more information, go to handsoffuhuru.org to volunteer, donate, sign the petition, and sign the emergency response pledge. And speaking of Hands Off Uhuru, two upcoming events, or one event and one volunteer orientation opportunity on Tuesday, February 28th at 8:30 p.m. Central European Time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The International Organizing Committee of the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Defense Campaign will host a special web event in French commemorating the International Month of African Martyrs from Cameroon to Haiti, featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other leaders based in Congo, Cameroon, Europe, and here in so-called US. Register and share this important webinar. Go to tinyurl.com/HOU2828 FEV, F-E-V. As Chairman Wade said, that's février en français. So tinyurl.com/HOU28 FEV. That's this upcoming Tuesday. And then the dynamic Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign is raging on, and the demand for Hands Off Uhuru is sweeping the globe. The people are winning, but there is still work to do, and there is a role for everybody. If you can't stand the FBI attacking our community and the organizations that uplift our community, we guarantee that there is a role for you in this campaign on March 10th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Central. You can attend the next volunteer orientation and learn how you can play a role in fighting back against these FBI attacks. Register today at tinyurl.com/HOU and UYOU. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement is holding their national convention on Saturday to Sunday, March 11 to 12 at the Aquaba Hall in St. Louis, Missouri. The convention calls on white people to say no to the FBI's war on Black liberation. For more information and registration, visit uhurusolidarity.org. The All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project hosts the Project Black Ankh International Conference on Saturday and Sunday, March 18th to 19th at the Aquaba Hall in St. Louis, Missouri. The theme of the conference is Building Our Own Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Response. For more information and registration, visit tinyurl.com/PBA conference. The African National Women's Organization will hold their annual convention Friday, March 24th through Sunday, March 26th. This event has moved to a solely virtual-based platform, so you can still register at convention.anwoahuru.org. Again, those dates are Friday, March 24th through Sunday, March 26th. And save the dates, Saturday and Sunday, April 9th and 10th, the Black is Back Coalition's 7th annual electoral campaign school will kick off in St. Petersburg, Florida. Stay tuned for more information at blackisbackcoalition.org. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating now at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other party speakers and leaders. And as you see, comrades, brothers and sisters, when the chairman, is on fire and you want to bring those types of electrifying, mobilizing presentations, to your campus, to your organization, and to do so, you have to book Chairman Omali and other Uhuru movement speakers for your campus or organization by emailing us at info@uhurutours.com or calling 727-914-3621. So book now. And for our final announcements, for more events that were not listed here, you can go to theburningspear.com/events to check out everything going on in the Uhuru movement. And before we open it up for our questions, I just want to encourage everyone to join the African People's Socialist Party, that the task has been well established for us, even by reading this document, Tactics and Strategies. And the time is now to get off the sidelines and get active in your revolutionary party, your organization, APSP, Uhuru.org. It's also linked in the Facebook and YouTube description, so you should not have to look far. Go ahead and sign that contact form so we can reach out to you, so we can move you into the process of becoming a member of the African People's Socialist Party. So we're going to bring Comrade Chairman Omali Yeshitela back up with us so we can take some questions from our audience. And we want to recognize where people are viewing from. We have Battle Creek, Michigan, Everton West, Occupied Azania or South Africa, San Diego, California, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Lakeland, Florida, London, Fort Myers, Florida. Shout out to Comrade Nyindu. New York City, Fresno, California, Frederick, Maryland, St. Louis, Missouri, Collegeville, Pennsylvania, Gainesville, Florida, Sacramento, California, Washington, D.C., Columbus, Ohio, Huntsville, Alabama, and Montreal, Canada have all checked in with us this morning. Uhuru, and thank you so much for tuning in today. And Chairman, we're going to go ahead now into questions and answers. We are going to be looking at some questions that came in from last week that we were not able to get to. And
before going there, Director, let me just make a point that it responds also to your call for people who may be in the study who are not members of the African People's Socialist Party. Because I want to be clear that for us, this is not just some abstract exercise that we're involved in to tickle people's intellectual fancy. We're building the party. And that if you will see, should have seen up to now, and we'll see as we complete the study, that we've initiated, and listening to the announcements, you listen to the announcements, you will see that the party is involved in assuming responsibility for the question of African women, for the question of economic development, for the international revolution that we have to make in Africa, here, every place else, for the connection that we have with other peoples around the world, that the objective of the party is to lead everything. We're not going back to some kind of civil rights era where there's somebody who leads over here around voting and somebody leads over here, and where we've had instances of this government has really supported and promoted the whole notion of the African petty bourgeois with their own separate kinds of interests, like black feminists and black this and that, that's separate from the overall task of overturning a social system and making our people free. And so we're not going back to that. The African People's Socialist Party has opened the door to everybody to come into the African Revolution. And that's what we're saying, that people who are genuinely interested in ending our oppression and exploitation need to be finding a relationship to the African People's Socialist Party. and that moving beyond this single, single issue kind of politic, small circles that we're involved in. You got a party here with an extraordinary history that's developed tactics and strategies to liberate our own people, and has taken the responsibility for that leadership. And that's why you hear the party leads coalitions, creates and leads coalitions. The party leads the struggle around the oppression, extraordinary oppression of African women, of children, and things like that. For democratic rights, we created an organization, specifically a mass organization, deal with this issue of democratic rights. We're not going back to the civil rights movement and just to have some civil rights. The struggle for democratic rights has to forward the struggle against our colonial domination. So I just want to unite with you in saying that in tactics and strategy, what we're going through now should contribute to everybody who's in this meeting to understanding that. And the whole question of white people, which I think is an extraordinary question. Now, we have created in reparations. Practically, the party has taken that on. And everybody who's interested in all these questions should be beating the door down to come into the African People's Socialist Party. We didn't just discover it. This is something we've been fighting for 50 years, advancing these issues and struggles and creating organization and history, political maturity in this process. And we've gone beyond anything that's ever happened before, because the colonizer does not allow revolutionary organizations has not to exist more than 3 or 4 years before they question. We've been here 50 years. And so we have all this history, all this experience, and some level of political maturity, ideological development, and what have you, et cetera. So I just wanted to say that, Comrade Director. Please go ahead and move us toward the questions.
Uhuru, Chairman. We have some excellent questions, and we'll definitely have to take them over the course of, as we're studying this series and maybe even in other sessions. But this first one's coming last week from Comrade Arthur in Fresno, California, asked, is Black Lives Matter a mass movement? Uhuru.
I guess you can call it a mass movement of sorts. It's led by the African petty bourgeoisie. It's something that we've recognized for a long time, and we've sought to intervene in this question. That's one of the reasons the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations created for itself early on in this process, Black Community Control of Police Working Group. And the reason, in part, was to have the ability of a mass movement that attacked this question of police murder against us in a fashion that advanced the struggle against colonialism. And when you say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't advance the struggle against anything. And that's why Joe Biden and everybody else can join with, and that's why they've given him millions and millions of dollars, et cetera, to support this, because it takes us nowhere. It doesn't offer any leadership. It doesn't offer any suggestion of what the contradiction is. And the whole question of Black people having power is not even factored into the slogan demand. And the slogan should reflect something like that. The slogan can't tell the whole story, but it should reflect the aspirations of a movement, the direction, where you're going, how some suggestion of what it is you're fighting for. But Black Lives Matter doesn't say we're fighting for anything. That's why Joe Biden can, and I won't be surprised if some juncture, people who many Africans despise more than anybody, like Trump, could say Black Lives Matter. Okay, I agree. In fact, some people say, yeah, Black lives, all lives matter, et cetera. So that's not a profound statement, is it? So it's a mass movement under the leadership of the African petty bourgeoisie. And this is something we've said a long time ago, and we try to counter that by offering up a different mass slogan. Because when you say Black Lives Matter, what happens is that Zuckerberg, the same people who will ban us, shadow ban and keep us from reaching a larger audience, promotes this. And all of bourgeois media promotes Black Lives Matter. And even after they say that so much money has disappeared, et cetera, they support Black Lives Matter, because it doesn't take us anywhere, even as they make sure you can't hear Black community control of the police. In fact, that's one of the reasons that we're working for the Russians, according to the FBI, is because we run political campaigns based on Black community control of the police. That's an anti-colonial demand. So that's the reason we would say that. Not because we have some kind of envy about the likes and views that they can get on social media, but the majority of people who come out They come out and say, they pick up the sign. Somebody gets killed in your community by the police. Somebody runs out, they go tear up a cardboard box and write on it, Black Lives Matter, and rush out in the streets in a demonstration, because that's what's been informed. That's how they've been informed. Our responsibility is to take Black community control of the police. That's the thing that informs them in the direction of toward the assumption of political power. Uhuru. I hope that was helpful, Arthur. Yeah.
Uhuru, Chairman, and I'm going to do something a little out of order because it's the first time I've seen this viewer on the Sunday study, and I think that this is a really important question, just based on what it is that you've laid out. And this question is coming from today from Mike Sanito on YouTube, and asked, up until now, it has been my understanding that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism as put forth by Lenin. Can you clarify this point and your distinction here?
Yeah, I think that Lenin was dead wrong, so to speak. And then Lenin was trying to solve a contradiction that was occurring within the communist or socialist movement in Europe at the time, where some people who were relatively reactionary tried to make imperialism a kind of benign thing that people recognized they were struggling against. And he characterized it as the highest stage of capitalism. He characterized it as capitalism that has become rotten right. It's about to go. It's the last stage. That's what he has said. And what we say is Lenin is wrong in the sense that imperialism, the word imperialism stems from the word empire. And that's because the feudal empires, the ones that went throughout the world colonizing Africa and other peoples, beginning with the attack by Portugal on Africa, etc., that led to colonialism creating, for the first time in history, an integrated world economy. And so imperialism, according to Lenin, was the advanced stage. It was imperialism, rotten right. It was a point where it achieved a certain element of decadence, where other things that he said. But this is how it impacted on Europe and Europeans. The fact is, we say that Lenin was wrong, and that's an assumption that the capitalist mode of production was the prevailing dominant mode of production. We're saying that it's the colonial mode of production that gave birth to capitalism, and colonial mode of production came from empire. So the imperialists going all around the world, that this is the thing that empire gave birth to the system. And through the colonial mode of production, where that served as the foundation of the system of capitalism. We say that Lenin was wrong, that it was colonialism that gave birth to capitalism. And capitalism may very well be the highest expression of colonialism, not the other way around. And this places history right side up. And that's a really important thing for us to understand. And some people I know treat certain philosophical doctrine like theology, and can be really, really, really upset when you say that about Lenin. But I like Lenin. He was a really good guy. He was just wrong, wrong as hell, super wrong, and it misdirected the struggle of colonized people who find ourselves fighting against a manifestation of colonialism, something that gave birth to this thing that we call capitalism, and doesn't necessarily attack the contradictions that we are confronted with as colonized people. And that's the majority of the people in the world, by the way, live under the colonial mode of production. Uhuru. I hope that was helpful, Mike. What was Mike's last name?
Mike's last name, Sanito.
Spell it, please.
Sannito.
Oh, Sanito. Okay. Uhuru. Thank you.
Uhuru, he says, thank you, Chairman and Director Akile. Uhuru, thank you for tuning in with us today and for that question. Chairman, I'm going to give you one more question before we go into closing and wrap up. This question comes from Comrade Serapsi on YouTube, and they asked, does this movement have relationships with indigenous peoples in the United States?
Uhuru, thank you so much. We've always really struggled to have that relationship. We've always recognized that the twin pillars of the existence of capitalism as it manifests itself in the United States was the theft of colonized land, the stolen land and stolen labor of African people. This is the thing that came together. We've always recognized that inherent objective unity of the interest of the colonized indigenous people here. We have, in every effort it's been possible to do so, we have been on the front lines with the indigenous people. We were on Big Mountain when the federal government had discovered where the Diné people, they call them Navajo, were facing imminent assault. It was thought by the federal government because the feds had discovered the uranium there, and they were going to take that land back from the Diné people. And I appreciate the people armed up, asked everybody who could come and support them. We were there. And so we've, in so many other instances, we were there. And when we have an opportunity and there's a clear leading force that survives and puts itself out in the world and identifiable, we have always worked with the indigenous people here. And more than that, we one reason that we reject this whole notion of a so-called black belt nation of African people and the so-called I forgot the other characterization and that's used 5 states is because the indigenous people came under assault. And one of the sharpest manifestations of this attack on the indigenous people here, in addition to the genocide that's decimated millions and millions and millions of people, is the theft of their land. And so, so here we are trying to fight for our freedom. We have a national homeland. It's called Africa. We've been forcibly dispersed from Africa all around the world. And we don't say that everybody, all Africans in this country now within current U.S. borders are going to go back to Africa. Remember, it says everything we read in this document said current U.S. borders. I don't know if you heard that or not, because we don't expect that to be the case forever. You know what I'm saying? And so the fact is that we cannot engage in this struggle with the assumption that because we lived a certain place in this country for a long time against our will, against the will of the indigenous people, who now suffer mightily because of the theft of their land and resources, that we're going to claim the same land as our own. And so that adds another layer of oppression, exploitation on the indigenous people. And we see our struggle as the same. More or less, we are fighting against the colonial domination of our peoples. And so our approach to this question is quite different. We admit readily that this is the homeland of the indigenous people, and that our struggle for revolution, even as we have to make it from this vantage point, must necessarily be part and parcel of the struggle of the indigenous people to reclaim their land and et cetera. So I don't know if that was helpful or not. Who was that from? That was the comrade.
Syrup, known as Syrup C, username Syrup C.
Syrup C, is that the comrade who's in Gainesville, Florida? Where's this comrade located? Where?
I think they're actually in London, but Syrup C, you're on. You could clarify me in that section. But yeah.
Okay.
Uhuru. So
we hear some of the same arguments used to stealing the indigenous land that we've heard used by the Europeans who stole the land of the people in Palestine, and the Europeans who stole the land in what they call Rhodesia, steal the land, rename the land, what they call South Africa. There wasn't nobody here, so when we got in, we just took it, et cetera. It's garbage, nonsense. So we reject that, out of hand. Uhuru. Thank you, Comrade.
Uhuru, Chairman. They say, Syrup C says, thank you, Chairman. That was great, Uhuru, from the not so United Kingdom. Uhuru. So
thank you in part, I'm sure. Syrup C. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. So that will wrap up the Q&A portion for today, as we are at the end of the end of the study, unfortunately. But for those who are on watching with us, not to worry, we will extend this discussion in our next session of tactics and strategies. But Chairman, do you want to offer us any closing remarks before we officially close down the study for today?
The only thing I want to say is that I suspect that the study next time will be much shorter. We have, I think, less ground to cover, and it should give us an opportunity to get with a lot of the questions that have gone unanswered up to now. I want to appreciate everybody for being here. Comrade Director Akilia Nai, one of the 4 unindicted co-conspirators that the FBI is threatening to lock up, and everybody else for being here. Part of what we're doing with this and other studies is trying to lay a foundation. We know that this government will attack us, will jail us, will kill us, and et cetera. We've seen enough evidence of that. What we are doing now with this process is trying to lay a foundation so that any assault that they make on us will be something that work against them and forward the struggle of our people and the colonized peoples of the world. Is relate to Africa, Uhuru. Vanguard up.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. Want to salute this incredible discussion that we've been able to have, and also your leadership. I want to also thank the Omali Taught Me Show team for helping with this production of today's program, and also thank you to every single one of you who's tuning in today, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. We're glad to have you on with us. And I want to thank, again, and salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela for the profound leadership that you have provided for the African liberation struggle for 60 years of your involvement, your participation in making this fight happen. Make sure to follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Uhuru, comrades.
Uhuru, comrade, we want to move toward Uhuru.
Uhuru.